Hello again. Welcome everyone to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Certification course. Everyone in the auditorium can be seated. Welcome to all of you that are watching online via whether it be Facebook or the Peaceful Solution website page. Welcome and thank you once again for joining us. If you haven't been with us here recently or if you're just joining, we get messages every day. So that's the reason we always try to re-put these things into the minds of our audience. We know those of you that have been with us from the beginning know that we're in the third book of the junior high series. Just so everyone knows, these books are free to download online, and we've been through the character unit and the acceptance unit thus far. And if you go to our Facebook page, which is the official Peaceful Solution, you can download those. They're PDF files, and soon you will see, if it hasn't already been put up, the respect unit, because that's the unit we'll be into next here in probably the next month. We'll be to that unit. We'll be going through and building our building blocks of character is what we call it in the Peaceful Solution. And of course, all of this information, one book solidifies the foundation for the next. So it's extremely important. People are asking, do I just jump into this class? You know, I encourage everyone, go back to the very beginning. All the classes are up there on Facebook. And go all the way back to the beginning. And if you have any problem getting them, just contact us and we'll get you some direction on how you can do it. Because once again, all of these things, one builds upon the other. So make sure to try to get these things deeply rooted into as the Peaceful Solution says, the hearts and minds. And that will help everything that we cover and all the information the teachers bring, which is a lot of outside information to help kind of solidify it in the minds. It will help all of these things come together. But right now we're in the 7th chapter of the self-control unit. Tonight we're going to start on page 203. We finished page 202 last class. And of course, once again, we're still building and moving forward. And on page 202, if you look over to the very bottom of the page, all the things that we covered in the last class, notice you see it says that this is an example of how a lack of self-control regarding the environment can endanger everyone. And then, of course, notice this says, think of it like this. And here's the example we give. It is one thing to slip on the kitchen floor and to spill a glass of milk. That would be an accident. It's another thing to pour the glass of milk onto the floor because you don't want to walk to the sink. You know, that's something that's purposely done, and it's due to, that would be the character trait of laziness or being disrespectful, irresponsible. You could label all kinds of things there. But notice it says, either way, the milk is on the floor, but deliberately pouring it shows an uncaring attitude. In the same manner, deliberately dumping pollutants into our water shows a lack of concern on the part of an individual or organization. And we're going to start moving through tonight, and we're going to even discuss how most people in this world today do not realize that they are dumping pollutants into the water. And we'll show news articles and some other information that comes from the United States Geological Survey where they actually have known this for years, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. And of course, it's people are unknowingly doing these things. But turn back over to your lesson plan. We're still in Procedure 5. That's still found on LP 7D. And for those of you that may not be aware, those are the grade tab pages that you'll only find in the teacher's manual. So make sure if you order a book, you order a teacher's manual. If you download, that's what we have available for you as a teacher's manual. And you're free to print those out. Someone asked, could they distribute them? You're free to print them and distribute them as long as you don't change the information inside of it. That's one thing that we most certainly require of anyone who prints our literature, that nothing be changed within it. But here on Procedure 5, if you look down to the very bottom, about 2/3 of the way down, it says, have students read the article found on page 203. That's what we're going to do tonight. And discuss the questions at the bottom. Allow students to read just the facts on water pollution found on page 204. And we went over a lot of facts last class, and of course these things change from one year to the next, and from you have one disaster to the next. But all in all, if you look at it on a scale, I would say it would look like, if you would look at how the water supply and the safety of it and the cleanliness of it, it would look like PayPal or Facebook stock. It's just going down, and no one really expects it to come back up. That's kind of the way it's going. But here on page 203, it says, read the following article about one company's, notice, deliberate act of polluting our waters and the serious consequences of their actions. So remember, this is deliberate. Remember what we just read about the glass of milk. You know, you have the problem, but to intentionally cause yourself the problem doesn't make a lot of sense. You can try to ignore it. You know, you can try to not deal with it, but imagine just allowing filth to grow in your house. Someone gives you a brand new house, absolutely spotless clean. And then you allow filth to grow and grow. The trash never makes it to the trash can. The dishes never get washed in the sink. Any leftover food just gets thrown wherever. You know, there's shows that they show on Discovery Channel about things like this, where people live in some very disgusting places. And of course, people will go in and they call it, it's like hoarding. And they go in and everybody's, I can't believe this person lives like this. But in reality, we're all living like this where the environment is concerned. And when we get through showing and talking about our water tonight and also into the next teacher, because there's a lot of information and a lot of things to cover about our water, you'll find out our water is not as clean as you think it is. And if you've been reading what comes forth from even the government, they've been telling you it's not as clean as you think it is. So here on page 203, it's Mississippi facility corporate officers and employees plead guilty in illegal dumping case. Truck, Trailer, and Equipment Incorporated, also known as TT&E, a Pearl, Mississippi truck repair firm, its president, J.W. Fielder, and manager, Alan Fielder, pled guilty to conspiring to violate the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act and the Clean Water Act. Carlos Lindsay, a TT&E employee, previously pled guilty to the hazardous waste transportation and dumping conspiracy. The defendants were involved in a scheme that involved the dumping of hazardous waste and pollutants, including used solvents, grease, oil, and other waste, into a wetland and a tributary of the Pearl River that bordered the TT&E facility, and the legal transportation and disposal into an off-site wooded area. So here they have this chemical. Of course, they're supposed to be paying to reprocess those chemicals, but instead they're trying to save money by taking it out to what we would call a no man's land. Nobody's around here. Of course, we're going to see tonight how these things carry on, and they dump it, thinking that no one will notice. Well, the dumping hazardous waste and other pollutants into wetlands, rural waterways, and rural areas can create a significant risk to aquatic resources and wildlife and can make surface waters unsafe for human recreation and use as drinking water supplies. When sentenced, the Fielders and Lindsay each face maximum sentences of up to 5 years in prison and or fines of up to $250,000. TT&E faces a maximum fine of $500,000 when sentenced, and Stewart faces a maximum sentence of up to 1 year in prison and or fine of up to $100,000 when sentenced. So you can see that these rules and regulations governing what is to be done with these chemicals create a lot of money. There's a lot of incentive to hand out fines. But notice here the very first question, and this is the conversation you want to have with your students. Obviously, what is done is very harmful. And, of course, a lot of people look at this like a lot of people look at the war in Ukraine right now, or the war in Yemen, or the war in Syria, or the war in Iraq, the war in Iran, or, you know, the sanctions in Venezuela. You can look all around the world and people are suffering from things, but the way we've become as a society, if it's not really affecting us, we don't really care, right? They dumped it in the water. That's okay. You know, it's many states away. Let them figure it out. Well, if you don't have rules and regulations, of course, these things will destroy very quickly. It's kind of like when we went down to the Rio Grande and we toured a water treatment plant that was right on the Rio Grande. So you look at the river, and of course, right on the other side is Mexico. And we were laughing when we asked the sanitary supervisor of the water treatment plant, what rules and regulations govern this river? Well, the United States has very strict rules on what you can do. Okay, what does Mexico's rules say? No, they don't have very strict rules. So is there like a divider that divides American water from Mexican water when you go down the Rio Grande or something? And he just laughed. He said, no, this is one place it doesn't matter. It is what it is. And we'll read more about that tonight, but keep this in your minds, because here people are getting fines, but there's people still doing this. China, that's why their water supply is so bad right now. They don't really have many restrictions, and that's why American companies like doing business in China. They don't have to pay for the disposal of these chemicals, this waste. But here, one, if you were the judge in this case, what fine would you give and why? So what would you do? If you could judge this case, of course, the first thing you'd want to do is know what the law says. You don't want to be creating new laws and new rules, because we have to operate within a system of justice. That's the way everything is supposed to work. So rules and regulations that govern it. You wouldn't want to, well, that person, they probably killed fish. They probably killed this. They deserve to die. Well, and I guarantee you, one thing to get in your students' mind, what caused these men to think that this was going to be acceptable? This was a choice that they made. And they made a choice by the information that they were given, things they were taught, and obviously the keeping of rules and the self-control involving the environment itself was never implemented into these men's lives. So my personal self, if I was going to do something to these men, of course, if the fines are paying for what they broke, that would be satisfactory, but education would be the most important thing. And why not to do this ever again? Just charging somebody $500,000 isn't going to do very much if you don't educate them. So obviously try to get that into your students' mind, that what they did, they need to be educated on why it should never be done again. And that will help them to make better choices. Getting another fine is not going to help them. Going to prison, you can put people in prison for 20 and 30 years. And if you don't educate them, they come back out. Some people can be very bitter. I can only imagine. I talked to many people in prison, haven't met anyone yet that says that they've learned anything that would help them change their life unless they go searching for it. And that's why our correspondence course is so huge with the prisons, because they have to go searching for it. But here's the next question. It says, do you find the penalties fair or unfair? And notice the italicized here, and you state your reason. The individual response will vary. The fact that they will fine large amounts shows that deliberately polluting the environment is a criminal offense and should be taken seriously. One thing for people to understand, $250,000 for a business is not a lot of money. That might sound like a lot of money to someone that's never had $250,000 in their hand. $500,000 for a business that is mildly successful is not a lot of money. So this is something that, would it affect them? Of course it would. You're talking $500,000, but that's doable. That doesn't cause someone to not do it again. Sometimes people, well, it was cheaper to do that than it was to pay for this, so I actually came out cheaper by just paying the fine. And you hear that said often. But once again, the key to fixing this is education. And then looking over here to page 204, and it says just the facts on water pollution. Notice it says approximately 1.5 billion people lack safe drinking water, and at least 5 million deaths per year are attributed to waterborne illnesses. Once again, we've shown other statistics here recently where this information came out in 2003, 4, and 5. We just showed information last class that was very up to date with the last report from the World Health Organization, and it hasn't gotten any better. In the year 2000, this is the next bullet point. In the year 2000, the Natural Resource Defense Council reported that 11,270 beaches were closed due to water pollution that consisted mainly of raw sewage and toxins. Raw sewage and toxins. That, once again, remember we showed the pictures of not just the housing and hotels flushing their sewer out into the ocean, but also the cruise ships themselves. And you can imagine if people, never take for granted that everyone's been to the beach and seen the ocean and the tide come in. I think I was 20 years old before I ever went to the ocean and seen the tide come in. And people just assume you know what that is. People would tell me about it. I had no clue what it was. And when I seen it, I was amazed. Get a video if you have to show how the tide comes in. That way your students can see that if you flush the sewage out, it's like throwing a boomerang. It comes right back at you. It's dispersed a little bit, but it comes right back at you. It's not we look at the ocean as a disposal. Like we can throw it in and then it goes away. Well, it doesn't really go away. In fact, it washes back up on shore, and it's shown to, there's proof of that. There's tests, many tests done. And one time, myself and 2 other Peaceful Solution teachers, we went to South Carolina to teach. And this is after I moved to Texas, so I'm very familiar with the area, though. And we stayed at a place that was pretty much right there on the ocean, because we looked at it from the balcony, but we didn't have the, I would say we were smart enough not to go walk on the beach. Let's just put it that way. But we wanted to see the ocean and stuff like that. And so we stayed there. And of course, when we were walking down the boulevard there were signs everywhere telling you, but they were kind of faced, so they were facing the building. You literally had to go around to like this to see what the sign said, but it was warning telling you about the bacteria found in feces was at a high level, and you were advised to not go on the beach. But the sign was actually put so you would have to walk out of your way to walk around to see it. And the beaches were full of people walking barefooted. You know, they think that sand is so smooth and so silky, and you know, one day when they find out why it's sliding between their toes, it won't be as so memorable as a vacation, as they say. But continuing on here, it says, people who ingest polluted water containing PCBs. Now, PCBs are polychlorinated biphenyls, and of course, they are derived from petroleum products. They can develop cancer and produce children with birth defects. And I remember going down to right outside of New Orleans with some Peaceful Solution instructors, and a place they call Cancer Alley. A lot of people from Louisiana are very familiar with this area. And there's a lot of that in that area because of this byproduct that is washed out there. And it's not that it couldn't be dealt with properly. It's just over the years, you know, the goal of business, as David was talking about, is to make money. It's the bottom line. To do, as, you know, keep your costs low, keep your profits high, especially if you have investors involved. Then the next one here, we see that water seeps through the porous rock and is stored beneath the ground. It's called groundwater. In the United States, approximately half the drinking water comes from underground. The EPA has estimated that anywhere between 25 and 75% of groundwater is contaminated from leaking underground storage tanks and seepage from direct well injections of hazardous waste into the underground rock formations. Once polluted, underground water remains contaminated for a long time. You know, you can also take your students, you can find these on YouTube, where there's people in West Virginia, for example, where there's been a lot of fracking, where they can turn their faucets on and then they can take a lighter and light the water up. There's that much gases coming through from the water supply into their houses. And these are water wells. But this is taking place due to fracking, which cracks the rocks, allows the gas to seep. And they're very easy videos to find, but it's just like the one we showed last class where the ocean was on fire. Now, if you can turn your faucet on and light it up with a lighter and it starts burning, obviously that's not something you should be drinking. That's something that can destroy you. And imagine taking a bath in that. Imagine what it does to the skin. You know, your skin absorbs in a lot of things, especially your feet. And imagine if that's being absorbed into your body. Just think of the things that we're taking into our body that was never meant to be there. Notice here at the very bottom, just 1 cup of gasoline can pollute 350,000 gallons of water. So, you know, you talk about parts per billion or parts per million, and it doesn't take much to do a lot of pollution. And it doesn't take a lot to pollute areas that most people would think, well, we don't have that where I live. Well, is that your opinion? Have you actually inquired? Do you know that the municipal city water system actually gives out information of the test every year? Here in Abilene, you got to ask for it. They don't really want to give it out because it's always an adventure to see what it looks like. You know, but they will give it to you, though. They don't fight with you because it's public information. But it's one of those, it's like when a restaurant gets a B sanitary grade, they'd like to turn the sanitary grade around so no one can see it. It's still displayed, it's just backwards. I've been in restaurants and seen them like that before. But if we could show our first slide, I want to show you something from the United States Geological Survey.com. So this is information that is put out by the government itself. And I see our slide's a little bit cut off. It says pharmaceuticals get into the water supply via human excretion and by drugs being flushed down the toilet. You might think wastewater treatment plants would take care of this situation, but notice, very important, but pharmaceuticals pass through water treatment. So they cleanse out certain bacterias, but the pharmaceuticals themselves are not actually removed as much as you think. And in the next slide, it says the flow of pharmaceuticals, many of the more than 4,000 prescription medications used for human and animal health ultimately find their way into the environment. They can pollute directly from pharmaceutical manufacturing plants or from humans and animals. As these chemicals make their way into the terrestrial and the aquatic environments, they can affect the health and behavior of wildlife, including insects, fish, birds, and more. Now, this is a picture on the next slide you can see. This was taken off of the website of the USGS, and this would be very important for you to show your class, because it actually shows, you see the circle right there with the toilet, and the toilet being flushed, and the water sewage treatment plant. And then, of course, most people don't realize the process. When you flush your toilet, goes to the treatment plant, then they shoot the water back out into the river. Remember, the government just said that pharmaceuticals are not removed in this process. And I don't know if you really considered, but pharmaceuticals is one of the biggest businesses in the world. There's a lot of people taking pharmaceuticals. And just like whenever they want to test for COVID in a community, they will test the water treatment plant. Why? Because the bacteria can be found there through the elimination of the body. You know what else is found there through the elimination of the body? Many, many, many drugs are found there. Not to mention the things that are eliminated. So you have the disease and the drugs that are coming out there. But you see the water to the bottom right-hand corner. You see the fish. They're there. You also see the birds that are eating fish that are in the water. You see the bird in the tree limb there in the top right-hand corner that's eating things that come from the water. Here at the bottom left-hand corner, you see the cow, which is also drinking water from the same thing. The pastures are irrigated from that water, and of course the feed. Water is used in many processes of many different things affecting the cow. Of course, here comes the vulture that wants to eat the cow that died. And it's just a cycle that keeps going and going and going. And then, of course, you have the fertilization itself of things that are also causing runoff. But it shows how all of this stuff is working in a cycle. And it's just like taking a piece of metal and you bend it. You know, it's not too weak, but you keep bending it, and you keep bending it, and you keep bending it, and eventually it's going to break. Well, that's the same thing with our water supply system. Eventually, it's going to break. It's going to collapse. It's going to fall apart. Now, I've got some articles I want to read you, and I put them up on the screen so you could see them and also write down the websites they come from, because teachers out there that are wanting to present these things, this is endless information. These are just 3 that I pulled off randomly. I didn't pick them for any other reason other than I thought they fit into the presentation today, but there were pages and pages of pages if you Google pharmaceuticals in water supply or pharmaceuticals in drinking water. So here on the next slide, this is from the Medical News Today. And it says the AP investigators discovered that drugs have been found in the drinking water of 24 major metropolitan areas across the country. Here are some of the key findings. Southern California, a portion of drinking water that supplies 18.5 million people, contain traces of anti-epileptic and anti-anxiety drugs. Now, that's to say the least. You're going to see here, going to the next slide, that there was a 5-month investigation by the Associated Press. It has discovered that small quantities of drugs, including antibiotics, sex hormones, and anti-seizure compounds, have been found in public drinking water supplied to over 40 million Americans across the United States. And continuing on to the next slide, it says, while the concentrations are so small, they have to be measured in parts per billion or parts per trillion. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute. You should take a cup out of clean water and set it on the table in front of your students. And just take a dropper, you know, you can have chocolate milk in it, whatever you want, and tell them, listen, okay, I'm going to put 1 part of feces in it. Okay, there we go. Just a small drop. It won't even hurt you. Who wants to drink it now? Does it make you feel better if you know there's only 1 part per billion inside of your drinking water you're drinking that comes from sex hormone drugs or anti-inflammatory drugs? Of course not. That's not what you think. When you get your water, you expect it to be clean. Well, when we say clean water, that's it's not a real true statement in most cases. But continuing on here, with that slide, going back to the top, it says, while the concentrations are so small, they have to be measured in parts per billion or even parts per trillion, and water companies insist these levels are within safety limits. And by the way, the man did not drink the water at the water supply station we went to. The AP said that the long-term effects on people's health of so many prescription drugs and over-the-counter medicines, such as acetaminophen or paracetamol, and ibuprofen, even in tiny amounts, are starting to worry scientists. Now, this is in 2008, remember. On to the next slide. It says, drugs and their derivatives get into the drinking water supply because when people go on medications, go to the toilet, they excrete whatever the body does not absorb and any metabolized byproducts. Water companies treat the waste before discharging it into rivers, lakes, and reservoirs, and then treat it again before it enters the drinking water system. However, the various treatments, notice, do not remove all traces of drugs. They do not remove. And I've just read you one from the United States government that says they don't remove it. Here's a study, an investigation that was done confirming they do not remove them. And it says for 5 months, the AP National Investigative Team visited treatment plants, interviewed over 200 scientists, officials, and academics, analyzed federal databases, and reviewed hundreds of scientific reports. Now, going on to the next slide, all of this is one article. I just wanted to put it up so if people that, as they watch the slideshow, they can also read this for themselves and go back and reference these things. But continuing on, it says, among their inquiries, the AP investigators came across research studies that have gone virtually unnoticed by the general public. Well, why is it unnoticed? Most people don't even think to ask. They wouldn't even consider to ask. Where scientists were alarmed at the effect of the drinking water contaminants on human cells and wildlife. The investigators also found that water companies don't like to publish the results of drug screening tests because they think the public would not know how to interpret them and would become unduly alarmed. Most people, if they found out that pharmaceuticals that very sick people are taking, I'm talking about, people with disease are taking, and they're eliminating it, and somehow it came through them and ended up in my drinking water. I don't know how you're unduly alarmed by that. Just for the fact that something left someone else's body, and now it's in my drinking water, and someone's telling me that that's acceptable, it's just a small amount, that seems very bizarre to me. Like we showed with Legionnaire's disease. You can't see it, but once you get it, you're going to feel it. The same thing with typhoid. But continuing on here, it says, however, the United States Environmental Protection Agency, that's the EPA, Assistant Administrator for Water, Benjamin H. Grumbles, told the AP that we recognize it is a growing concern and we're taking it very seriously. My next question would be, what are you doing? Taking it very seriously doesn't really change anything. It doesn't really make my water cleaner that you're taking it very seriously. Does that mean you went home and drilled a well for yourself? What does that mean? The AP investigators discovered that drugs have been found in the drinking water of 24 major metropolitan areas across the country. Here are some of their findings. On to the next slide. So for those of you in Southern California, a portion of drinking water that supplies 18.5 million people contain traces of anti-epileptic and anti-anxiety drugs. If you live in Philadelphia, treated drinking water, notice treated drinking water, that means it's been through the process twice, once it went out, once it came in, contains 56 drugs or byproducts, including pharmaceuticals for pain, infection, cholesterol control, heart condition, and asthma. Now, if you live in San Francisco, a sex hormone was detected in the drinking water. Move along to our nation's capital on the next slide. Washington, D.C., 6 drugs were found in the drinking water supply of the capital and surrounding area. I won't comment on that other than it's not acceptable drinking water. Tucson, Arizona, an antibiotic and 2 other medications were found in the drinking water. And here they say northern New Jersey, drinking water for 850,000 residents was found to contain carbamazepine, a mood stabilizer, and a metabolized byproduct of angina medication. This was found by the U.S. Geological Survey researchers who analyzed the treatment plant. Now, that, of course, that's controlled by the government themselves. So think about that. Now, that was only a few of the 24 that they found major problems in. And looking back here to page 205, there's still a couple we want to go through, but it's important to realize, as we see here on page 205, the damage is already done. The damage is already done. And that's something, once again, this book came out in 2005. And it hasn't got better. It's only gotten worse. And this is not a conspiracy to bring down the water system. It's just a call to attention. How do you fix problems? If you know something's broken, you educate. And who are the future leaders of tomorrow? We started out in the Peaceful Solution when we first began that we're giving our future over to the teachers. They are the children of today, will be the leaders of tomorrow. And if this is put into their minds to be important, just as we have tried our best to put into the minds of our students here, then something eventually gets done. This is not a problem that gets fixed overnight, but as we talked about, a lot of nations don't have clean drinking water. Here in the United States, we tend to think we have clean drinking water until Jackson, Mississippi water goes downhill, or Flint, Michigan, who has yet to recover from what they're going through, and other places that not only are their city municipal supplies messed up, but even well water from fracking has been destroyed due to the lack of care and the desire to generate huge income. So hold your finger there on page 205 because we're entering into the next procedure, and that's procedure 6. So we want to make sure we go back to our procedures and read this. And notice it says stress to students. This is found on LP 7D. Stress to students that contaminants in our water affect the health of both animals and people. So this discussion we're having actually affects everybody's life that drinks water. You go, I don't drink water, I drink Coke. Well, Coke is made from water. I don't drink, I drink Pepsi. Well, it's made from water. I drink Gatorade, it's made from water. I drink tea, coffee, it doesn't matter. Well, I don't eat any of that stuff. Well, there's water in your canned food. There's water in the production of your food. There's water in everything. We cannot live without water. You can live without food for quite a few days, but you can't go but so long without water. That's just a scientific fact. So once again, when you stress that these contaminants are in our water, this is life-affecting situations taking place here. It says, however, if we as a society would consider how we treat our water supply, we can make a difference. Instruct students to read the section entitled The Damage is Already Done on page 205 and Efforts to Save Our Water on page 208. So going back to page 205, the damage is already done. Does that mean give up? Does that mean walk away from it? It's already destroyed. Don't worry. We'll pledge another $1 trillion and we'll do a little more. Well, keep in mind, it'd also be a great thing for you to take your students through to see what kind of technology is being invented. Bill Gates is very well known for inventing or financing, not inventing himself, but financing through a nonprofit organization, the ability to turn sewer water into drinking water in a matter of minutes. You can take raw sewage, put it in one end, and it processes it through, and there's a nice cup of water at the end. But remember, the treatment plants don't remove the pharmaceuticals at all. They're there. They're testing positive for them. There's an enormous amount of information out there about this. But once again, it's so small that you don't want to be alarmed about it. That's what they tell you. Once again, if somebody was to tell you there's 2 glasses of water, this one is clean, this one only has 1 part per billion fecal matter in it. Which one do you want? You're going to want the one that's clean. Who knowingly wants to drink something they know is filthy? Well, here on page 205, it says that fish that live in polluted waters become contaminated. Now, if you could go ahead just with that one sentence, if you could put up the next slide. And this is called Drugs in the Water. This was put out by Harvard Health Publishing And this was put out June 1st, 2011. And it says, pharmaceutical pollution doesn't seem to be harming humans yet, but disturbing clues from aquatic life suggest now it's time for preventive action. That means fish. The aquatic is the what's swimming and living in the water. We're starting to see things in there. Although maybe not as tasty as an ice-cold gulp from a mountain spring, the water that flows through most American kitchen faucets is generally clean, clear, and safe. Approximately 175,000 public water systems are monitored for nearly 80 harmful substances. The prohibited nasties include bacteria, viruses, pesticides, petroleum products, and strong acids, and some metals. But once again, remember what's not being treated? Pharmaceuticals. They're getting through. Going over to the next slide, this is from the same study. How bad is the problem? It says a study conducted by the U.S. Geological Survey in 1990 and 2000 found measurable amounts of one or more medications in, notice, 80% of the water samples drawn from a network of 139 streams in 30 states. This is not isolated to San Francisco or Southern California or Northern New Jersey. Here's 30 states. The drugs identified included a witch's brew of antibiotics, antidepressants, blood thinners, heart medication, ACE inhibitors, calcium channel blockers, digoxin, hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, and painkillers. Scores of studies have been done since. Other drugs that have been found include caffeine. Now, that would be a synthetic kind of caffeine, which, of course, comes from many other sources beside medication. Carbenzamipine, I actually can pronounce this word if I try. Carbenzamipine, an anti-seizure drug, fibrates, which improve cholesterol levels, and some fragrance and chemicals. And a lot of that, they say, where the fragrance and chemicals are coming from are from laundry detergent. And how many people use laundry detergent, and then it goes right out into their water supply. But here, the next slide, and this ties into what we're talking about now, because this is an article that came out just this year in the Tampa Bay Times. And it says, prescription drugs are contaminating Florida's marine life, researchers find. It says a recent Florida International University study identified 58 different drugs in bonefish from South Florida's coastal water. Notice a single fish had 16 drugs in its system. Now imagine that. That's the fish that's living in that water supply out there, and it had 16 drugs in its system. Now notice how we started in 2008. We're starting to worry about it. It's what the EPA representative said. And then in 2011, it's, well, we don't see it affecting humans yet, but we're kind of seeing it in the fish. And in 2022, it's all the fish are really, really, they're druggies now. Could you imagine eating a fish that has 16 different drugs in it? If you think that it doesn't get into the meat and enter into your body, you're very uneducated concerning what you're putting in your body. Whatever is in the food that you eat will get into the body and it contaminates you. You let an animal be sick and you eat it, you'll get sick too. But here's the last article that we're going to read before we get into this, and this is just to show you. This came out June 22nd of 2022. And then we're going to tie all of this together because notice the damage is already done. 43% of world's rivers contain dangerous levels of prescription drugs. 43%. There's more than trash and microplastics polluting the world's waterway. Close to half of all rivers on the planet are contaminated by pharmaceutical drugs, a new study has shown. Researchers found 23 active ingredients exceed safe concentrations, including those in antidepressants, antihistamines, stimulants, benzos, and painkillers, in 43.5% of the 1,052 individual samples taken in 104 countries. Now, there's a reason why the pharmaceutical industry makes so much money because, well, people take them. There's a time in life when your body hurt and you had a pain and that let you know something was wrong. And we as a society came to the point where we'll take a painkiller, it makes the pain go away. Your body's still hurt and it's still something wrong. Just because you don't feel it, it's like having a tooth and you have a cavity and you'll do anything to get that nerve to stop throbbing. And you get something on that nerve and the pain stops, but you still have the problem. And it lets you know a couple days later, a couple weeks later that, hey, I'm still here. I didn't get fixed. Well, it's the same thing with our water supply system. Once again, back here to page 205, it says that the damage is already done. So fish that live in polluted waters become contaminated. Now notice this was put out in 2005 by the Peaceful Solution, and there was a research team that went through and pulled off an enormous amount of information at that time. But notice the news articles we just brought you, it took till 2022 before they said that. But the information has been out there for many, many years, but now it's being acknowledged. And it's not just a problem for the United States. This is a global problem. Notice it says, because the concentration of contaminants increase further up the food chain, humans who are top predators are at a greater risk. Being at the top of the food chain simply means that we can eat all the foods that we want that are healthy and appropriate, but nothing eats us. A person who regularly eats contaminated fish will end up with higher concentrations of contaminants in his body. You know, and even the author one time, I remember he went on a trip to teach and speak in Canada about the Peaceful Solution. And he spent some time in Michigan. And he was telling a group of us, I think he's even mentioned it in conferences where he gave speeches, about how there was a sign there on the dock when you went out to Lake Michigan telling you only eat so many of those fish because of the chemicals that were in the fish. The human body should not have any more than this, this, and this. So don't eat more than, I think it was 2 fish per person. Now that's letting you know that you're eating something that's contaminated. You know, it doesn't make it very appetizing. But also notice, looking back to page 194 with this in mind, remember it was covered, what goes around comes around? And that's what takes place with our food supply and even what we eat. And I know this sounds grotesque when you're talking to a group of students or when you're talking to anyone, but what we eat and what we eliminate, if we flush it right back into our drinking and water supply, there's nothing there that really deals with or breaks down the things that we're actually disposing into areas that we're going to reuse. You know, the term recycling to save the environment has become such a huge statement in today's society. Every time I walk by and I go to get a drink or a bottle of water, it actually makes me want to vomit when I see made from recycled plastic. And it's not that I think it's a bad thing to try to not create an enormous amount of trash. It just makes me I really think, well, what was it recycled from and how did they clean it up? Because the water that's inside the bottle, I already know the government says is not truly clean if it came from the city municipal water supply. So those are things that actually you have to think about what we're doing and how it's going. And there are ways to fix it. But once again, keep in mind, are we going to cause problems? No, the damage is already done. We have to fix it now. It's kind of like if you cut your hand pretty bad, you don't discuss, well, what could take place if I was to cut my hand this way or that way? Well, no, the damage is already done. It's time to fix the damage you've already created. We've created as a society. But here, once again, to get this back into our minds, on page 194, have you ever heard the expression, what goes around comes around? You hear people talk about karma all the time. What this means is that what you put into something is what you get out of it. Remember, we also talked about garbage in, garbage out with our character. We talked about media intake and the things we allow our children or ourselves to see through education or through entertainment. That affects us, but also what we eat can truly affect our bodies and the way we think. It affects our health overall. Continuing on, it says, the effort and thought that we put into how we care for our environment will determine whether we reap positive or negative results. And that's not just character. We're talking about overall health here. If we continue contaminating the soil and air, then we will no longer have clean, fresh air to breathe or rich soil in which to plant. If you think the air you breathe is fresh enough, then consider this cold, hard fact. And of course, it went into a study of 1948 about Pennsylvania with air pollution. But I want you to think about this huge push for electronic vehicles. And I'm not trying to be an anti-EV guy or anything like that, but they're saying that we could cut down carbon emissions. So we're trying to clean up the air we breathe. I challenge you and challenge your students, try to find what's being done to clean up the water that the government, scientists, physicians, everyone is readily admitting that is contaminants in the water, and they're not being treated, and people are taking them. They're actually getting it into their body through this way. All of this is factual basis. There's no conspiracy. It's readily available in studies, and it's shown even through government websites. But I challenge you to find what's being done about it. Find one thing. You see this huge push to get rid of what they say fossil fuels, and you need to get electronic vehicles. You need to do this. You need to do that. You need to recycle. Well, the bottle is recycled, but it's what's in the bottle that has me worried to begin with, because that's recycled too. And I'm not really looking to drink something that's recycled. But it's only certain parts per billion. Keep that in mind. Well, here looking down at the bottom of the page, you see more about these PCBs, or the polychlorinated biphenyls, and that's the PCBs we read about in the Just the Facts on Water Pollution. Remember, they're petroleum-based. They're only one of many man-made chemicals that were found in our lakes and streams. You look up here, and you see the man fishing in contaminated water. No fishing. And you see the dad, well, what does that sign say? And then the son, not now, son. Or here you see the son saying, Dad, what does that sign say? And then the dad says, not now, son. Can't you see I'm trying to catch a fish? Here sometimes it does help to listen to someone that we think might not be smarter, but they could be. If you've been drinking someone else's deposits in your water for the last 30 years and your son goes, I don't think I want to do that. Your son probably just made a smarter comment than this end around life we've got into, to where we're just following the common circle. But continuing on here, it says it has, once again, that these chemicals being found in our lakes and streams, it has had serious consequences on the quality of life for many people. So think about that. People go to the doctor. Why? Because they feel sick. When you go to the doctor, what does the doctor do for you? He gives you pharmaceuticals. You go home, you take the pharmaceuticals, you drink water. Remember, you always take it with water. You got to stay hydrated. That's one thing they tell you with pharmaceuticals. If you're taking antibiotics, they also tell you to take things to regulate your colon, because antibiotics will destroy the enzymes in your gut, and it will cause you to not be able to eliminate feces in a proper way, and it will cause your body to back up. So all of these things you're putting in your body because you're sick, you're trying to eliminate with the use of drugs. But is it possible that people become sick due to the intake of things that are not truly clean? Well, notice PCBs were once used in the production of plastic, styrofoam, and many other man-made materials. Teflon, the latest Teflon pan that comes out, it doesn't stick. No, it doesn't stick. And, once again, take your students and go through research with them about these things. Don't take, my grandma said, or my grandpa said, or Uncle Joe said. Actually get in and research to see what the truth is on these things. You'll find out we live in a society that, due to being uneducated, we just continue to do stuff. But it's such a small part of poison we're taking. Well, if you eat a little poison today, and you eat a little bit more tomorrow, and you eat a little bit the next day, and you eat a little bit for 40 years, what do you think the end result is? Well, the doctor told me I had this now. Where did that come from? Well, you can't do but so much, and it becomes, just think about just not washing our hands and how much disease is spread by just not washing a hand. We went through that in detail. But we're talking about the things that are on our hands. We're flushing that out into the rivers. Remember, just so, because a lot of people, especially children, don't realize it. You flush your toilet, sewage treatment plant. They remove certain things, and then they shoot the rest after they inject it with chemicals out into the river or the lake. Then they pump the water from the lake back into the water treatment plant, and then they treat it some more, and then they shoot it into your faucet. Well, it goes into the big water tanks, and then into your faucet. That's the municipal city water supply. I encourage everyone to go to your local city municipal water supply and have them give your students a tour. Most of them will do that. They're joyful to do it, just so they can see the process of how water is done. That's why we did it. We were blessed to be able to go to one that had not even fully opened for operation. It had the latest, greatest technology. And the guys were very honest with us, brutally honest with us, and told us what not to expect. And I'll never forget, the guy that was there, he wouldn't drink the water at the end. He said, "No, I'm not drinking that." And he's the one that made it, along with a lot of other workers. But he also told us that he would never drink bottled water. He says, "Can you imagine when you put water in a car and it sits for a couple days in the heat through that plastic? You know how you grow bacteria, right? Whatever's in it to begin with, you let it sit, it's going to grow more and more and more." And he was serious about this. Then, of course, what is the result? Well, it causes diarrhea. The bacteria does. Why does it cause diarrhea? Because there's something in your body that your body's trying to get out because it's not supposed to be there. You can't tell your body, but listen, it's only 1 part per billion. You know, you got to have to live with this. It doesn't work that way. And it's never going to work that way. But continuing on here, it says, by the time the environmental and scientific communities discovered the dangers of the chemical, it had already made its way into the soil, air, and water of our environment, contaminating fish that are frequently eaten by people. Even though PCBs were banned from use in the United States in 1976, their harmful effects continue to this day. And remember, go back to page 154, because these are things we covered, and we want to continually tie these things in with our students. And we covered this also in the character unit, but it's called the ripple effect. And of course, here on page 154, looking at the very top, it says, let's take a look at society. It says, when you hear the word society, what is the first thing that comes to mind? Is society the community in which you live, your schools, a place where you shop? Do you think of a society in terms of the city and the country that you live? Both of these answers would be correct. A society is a group of people with common interests and established patterns. Everyone within your community, city, and country in which you live makes up a society. On a global scale, the human race is one society. So here we're all living in this together. And notice we just read a report where it shows that this is half of the streams globally are contaminated. So on a global scale, the human race is one society because we all share certain common interests. For a society to function properly, the needs of its people must be met. Now, one need is to have efficient and clean drinking water. These needs include safety and shelter. But looking down here to the bottom part, it says both positive and negative actions can affect how we function, how society functions. Have you ever noticed what occurs when a pebble is dropped into a pool of water? Or for this example, you can drop feces, or fentanyl is pretty popular these days. Just drop a fentanyl pill, or, antihistamine, an anxiety drug, whatever you want to drop into the water. And the pebble hitting the water causes a series of circular ripples, each circle larger than the previous one. This is called the ripple effect. It demonstrates how one person's actions can cause a series of events affecting many others. Now, thinking about that, and turning back over to page 205, think about the honest person that has never been educated and doesn't know. And you can compare it to trying to tell someone about the tide coming in from the ocean, and if they've never seen it, they really don't know. I know I would hear people talk about it. I didn't really comprehend it. And a lot of things, if people have never done it, you can tell them, but they don't really kind of get the gist of it. Well, think about a person who's doing their best to be an environmentalist. They're trying to do everything with moderation, not waste, be conservative. But every day they take 6 or 7 pharmaceuticals, and then they go and they use the bathroom, and it's flushed right out into the city water supply. They're unknowingly helping to contaminate the city water supply. But it's not their fault. They're part of a system that has been running and doing things. And in no way am I saying don't take your medications. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that a better way needs to be created by leadership to deal with the known fact that pharmaceuticals are getting into the drinking water of society. And that's what's being done. If you want to know the strength of the society, of course, you look into the people. And it starts with leaders. And our children, once again, are future leaders. And it's going to be worse for them or it's going to be better. You know, it's kind of like the national debt. Whenever it was 7 trillion, people thought they're going to be paying for that 3 generations down the road. Now it's at 31 trillion, and we just need to add. We just need more. Just let it go. Yeah, we're not going to pay China anyway. Just let it go. Well, you can't do the water like that. You can't go down to the lake and stream and go, we filed bankruptcy. We're not going to do this with you anymore. Where are you going to get more clean water? Once again, we've talked about how the water is, the world is 70% water, but the clean, acceptable drinking water, you can be out in the middle of the ocean. You won't have anything to drink. So you have to really consider, we have a very small resource for 8 billion people. You know, saying that now we have too many people on the face of the earth. No, we haven't treated the earth with the respect that is due to it so it could care for us. If we were to care for the earth would care for us. But society hasn't done that. We've actually mistreated the earth enormously, and it didn't start with the driving of cars. You know, they were using kerosene long before the cars were being driven. They were burning coal in steam engine trains long before. You know, it's much more. And once again, compare this to what you hear about what's being said concerning clean water compared to the ozone from greenhouse gases. But turning over here to page 206, and of course we're continuing on. It says, one study done on the pollution of the Great Lakes in Michigan provided that there was a definite link between PCB birth defects, impaired learning abilities, and aggressive behavior in children. Aggressive behavior in children. Now, this is a scientific study that was done. Go online and do these things. Investigate these things with your children. When someone goes into a school or goes into a shopping mall or drives a vehicle through a bunch of, paraders that are going out for their parades, and we think, what got into that man's mind? Is he crazy? We really have to understand the cesspool that we created for us to live in. But as a society, we think if you put him behind bars, no, you know what? Just put him to death. Take his life. That's it. Just take his life. What caused this man or this woman to be this way? That's what society, and that's what the peaceful solution is trying to put into the minds of educators. You see the results of the problem, but what was the problem and why was the problem allowed to begin with? And how do you fix the problem? If you just look at the cause and think, well, that person's dead now, there won't be no more of that. If you haven't fixed the problem, it's going to continue. So continuing on here with reading this, it says, it is reported that because fishing is such a popular sport, even when communities were warned about the dangers of eating contaminated fish, many fishermen and their families continued to eat the fish they caught. Women who had eaten 2 or 3 fish meals a month accumulated toxic levels of PCBs in their body fat and then passed the PCBs to their babies through the placenta and through breast milk. The damage to the babies was evident at birth. Babies had lower birth weight, smaller head size, brains that were underdeveloped, weak reflexes, jerky, and unbalanced movements. Now, if that woman would go through and they would test her for what they call illegal drugs in her system, CPS will come take the child from actually at the delivery room. Because this person is an addict, they take it. But what was done in this case? Well, not much is being done. Not much is being done at all. So here to finish up on page 206, notice it says, pollution in our water can contaminate and kill fish and plant life. It can also affect our health, causing diseases and killing millions yearly. As the study of the Great Lakes in Michigan's proved, polluted water can also affect future generations. You can endorse drastic behavior through what's taking place. So once again, pull these things out and find the scientific studies that are there. Don't just, I think this, no, get the facts and show it. That's being educated, and that's the first positive character trait that's taught in the peaceful solution. We're going to stop right there at that point because there's an enormous amount to bring on this, and our next teacher will pick up on page 207. We're still in procedure 6, but there's so much more that could be added to this. You could spend a lot of time on this, especially if you live by a huge lake. If you were by Lake Okeechobee or by the Great Lakes, you could spend a lot of time educating yourself about what you're living around at that time. So we're going to stop on page 206. The next teacher will pick up on page 207, and the next class will be 11-6. So 11-6, that'll be this coming Sunday at 5:30 p.m. So thank you once again for joining us.